I got a Patreon request from a viewer named The Ocean Hunter to review Michael Bay's movie Pearl Harbor. This is usually regarded as one of his weakest films, but in a video I made 5 years ago where I talked about Michael Bay's reputation as a director, I said I considered it his best film. I do think the movie has some major flaws, and I do agree with many of the criticisms, so I don't consider it a great film. However, Bay still accomplishes some impressive things in Pearl Harbor, and in many ways it's probably his most restrained movie, as he uses less of his directing trademarks. Bay said he wanted to show with Pearl Harbor that he was capable of doing more than just the brainless popcorn fluff he was accused of. Yes, there are a few action scenes, but we also get a number of sequences involving war strategy and military training, and there's of course the central love story. He also wanted to create a realistic war movie in the vein of Saving Private Ryan, and an earlier film about the attack on Pearl Harbor, Tora Tora Tora. He originally wanted to make it with an R rating in mind, but still wanted to make a movie that a younger audience could see to hopefully fuel their interest in World War II. Disney, which produced the film under their Touchstone Pictures label, actually preferred a PG-13. A little surprising since Saving Private Ryan was a massive hit only a few years earlier, despite being rated R. However, they probably saw the mixing of the love story with an historical event as similar to Titanic, and wanted to market it to the same four-quadrant audience. Pearl Harbor was also one of the most expensive movies ever made at that point, with a reported budget of $140 million, and so Disney probably wanted to decrease the risk factor that a more restrictive rating might entail. The film originally had a price tag of over $200 million, but Bay, producer Jerry Bruckheimer, and lead actor Ben Affleck took pay cuts to help bring it down. Instead, they got a percentage of the box office gross, which apparently turned out quite profitable for them. So what is it that I appreciate about Pearl Harbor? I actually think it was a noble attempt on Bay's part to create an old-school Hollywood war movie. To accomplish this, he reined in many of the techniques born out of his time directing commercials and music videos, and which he continued to use on movies like Bad Boys and Armageddon. His movies often have very hyperactive editing with cuts every few seconds, and he also loves giving the cinematography in his movies a lot of intense colors. Less so in Pearl Harbor. It's filmed more like a traditional historical movie, and does have the feeling of a war movie that might have been released in the 30s and 40s. Only a few times does he revert back to his typical style, and that's mainly to show the disorientation certain characters are feeling. The most appropriate comparison I can make is to Howard Hughes' World War I movie Hell's Angels. That film also involved a love triangle taking place in the middle of a war, along with some breathtaking dogfight sequences. That movie even got similar reviews to the ones Pearl Harbor got, as most felt the war scenes were a lot more engaging than the cheesy love story. Of course, the centerpiece of the movie is the attack on December 7, 1941. It's a spectacular sequence utilizing some impressive special effects, sound design, and stunt work. The movie won the Oscar for Best Sound Effects Editing, and I think it was absolutely deserved. What the scene does well is show the bravery of the soldiers as well as the fear they felt with this sudden and unexpected attack. So many of them are thinking on their feet or trying to survive. Hans Zimmer composed a strong score too, the appropriate melodies for the romantic, military, and war scenes. The movie does run 3 hours, but I rarely felt the runtime. So what do I agree with the critics on? Well, the dialogue given to the three central leads is not the greatest, which does affect the love story. The characters themselves are not exactly the most fleshed out either. Ben Affleck's pilot, Rafe, is probably given the most characterization, as he's portrayed as patriotic and a bit of a hotshot and ladies' man. There's not a whole lot to him beyond that, but I understand his motivations. Then you have his buddy, Danny, played by Josh Hartnett. I felt he did not have any personality at all, and shared even less chemistry with Kate Beckinsale's nurse Evelyn than Affleck did. As goofy as Affleck and Beckinsale's meet-cute scenes are, I at least understood why these two would take a fancy to each other. And the more I thought about it, there's not much of a point to the love triangle. Rafe and Danny fight each other in a bar and then have a few conversations about it afterwards, but this is all pushed aside to focus on the Pearl Harbor attack and the Doolittle raid. I feel you could have cut that subplot entirely and it would not have affected the story that much. The nurses have even less of a personality. Through most of the film, they're primarily shown as interested in men, and that's it. I also think the attempts at humor don't quite land. A lot has also been said about the many historical inaccuracies in the film. It's expected that a movie is going to change some aspects of the real story for the sake of the narrative. A lot of times things have to be altered, as long as it isn't too distracting. However, researching and reading up on the time period and real events, there are a few unnecessary inaccuracies. For example, the movie has Rafe being asked to join the British Royal Air Force. However, because the United States was neutral during the first 2 years of World War II, Americans were actually prohibited from joining the war effort in Europe. There were American pilots in the RAF, but they had to cross through Canada in order to join. This was ignored in the movie, mainly to serve as a device for Danny and Evelyn to think he died in Europe. The movie also shows the Japanese deliberately shooting at hospitals, except they didn't. Not only for moral reasons, but also because the main point of the attack was to destroy the American Navy fleet and their weapons. I think this was done to show the bravery of the nurses as they deal with the oncome of injured soldiers, but you still could have shown that without depicting the Japanese doing something they never did. However, despite the flaws I mentioned, I do think Pearl Harbor is an okay war movie. Even if you have to sit through some narrative shortcomings to get to the good parts, I admire the honest effort Michael Bay took in trying to depict this event and try something different from his usual directing approach. I should mention he did make a director's cut of the movie, which was released in 2002, but that DVD is no longer in print and has never been released on Blu-ray or streaming. It's not that much longer than the theatrical cut, but its existence is still worth mention. Anyway, what do you think of Pearl Harbor? Do you agree with the negative reviews the movie got, or do you find the movie is better than it's given credit for? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for the request, Ocean Hunter.